what if the history you've always known, the timelines in the textbooks, what if they're, well, more flexible, maybe even manipulated than we think? What if those big stories we learn have what one mathematician calls hideous inconsistencies, things that kind of only make sense if you don't think too hard about them?
That's a challenging thought, definitely, because we really take that BCI timeline, the whole framework, as solid ground, don't we?
We absolutely do. And today we're jumping into a really revolutionary and, let's be honest, pretty controversial deep dive. We're looking at a total reevaluation of history through the eyes of Russian mathematician Anatoly Fomenko.
Right.
His work, especially The Issue with Antiquity, that's book 5 in his big history, fiction, or science series. It goes right after the foundations of that standard BCA chronology, the one often called Scaligerian history.
Yeah, after Joseph Scaliger. So our mission today is really to unpack Fomenko's main idea that history only makes sense to us when we don't reflect upon it too much.
And he comes at it from a different angle, doesn't he? He claims he uses nothing but natural scientific methods to build this alternative chronological scale for human history.
Exactly. It's being called a Copernican revolution for history. And Fomenko says his version is extremely logical and interestingly brief.
Brief? Okay. Yeah. But he warns it leaves no room for your old dogma. So we're going to dig into how this math expert, this statistician, even got into historical research.
Which is quite a story in itself.
Right. And we'll look at the surprising things his team supposedly found, these incredible phantom reflections, like duplicated histories that they say stretch across thousands of years.
Okay, let's get into it. Fomenko and his team, they start by pointing out what they see as just a sheer lack of logic in the standard story of history. He argues that if you really look closely at certain periods, it almost feels like historians have to practice this sort of Orwellian concept of doublethink, holding two contradictory ideas at once just to make the timeline work.
Like the Dark Ages example he gives.
That's a good one.
The name itself implies what? That people just went into utter hibernation.
Right, as if they just stopped fighting, inventing, moving around for centuries.
Yeah, from his view, that whole concept just seems, well, unlikely. Like progress just hit pause.
And then there are these specific details he flags as hideous inconsistencies. Things like descriptions of Roman senators meeting in the Capitol ruins, but the roof seems to be made of concrete.
Which he says wasn't invented until much, much later, like the 16th century.
Exactly. Or Gothic cathedrals supposedly taking centuries and centuries to build. He questions the feasibility of that, the practicalities. These little details, they just don't sit right for him within the accepted story.
It's like finding, I don't know, a smartphone and a picture of ancient Egypt. It just throws things off. And these kinds of issues led him to this really radical claim.
Which is?
That the entire conception of ancient and medieval history known to us today owes its existence to a 6th century Jesuit hoax.
Wow. Okay, so he's naming names.
He is. He points mainly to Joseph Scaliger and Dionysius Petavius and their followers, and the scale of this alleged hoax. It's huge. He even suggests, for instance, that the Roman Catholic Church is involved in a much greater hoax than the most daring writer could possibly conceive of.
A hoax dealing with history itself.
Yes, the very foundations. He says, unnerving as the idea might seem, popular fiction dealing with conspiracies is actually quite tame as compared to reality.
So he's saying questioning this timeline is as big a deal as heretical as questioning if the Earth rotated back in Galileo's day.
That's the comparison he makes. It's meant to really shake up how you think about how history gets written.
So how does a mathematician end up here? It wasn't his original field, right?
Not at all. It was totally unexpected. His main thing was professional mathematics, specifically celestial mechanics. He was looking into this parameter, the coefficient d double prime, in the theory of lunar motion.
Okay, d double prime.
Well, an American astronomer, Robert Newton, had already spotted something weird, an inexplicable leap in how d double prime behaved around the 8th, 10th centuries AD. Newton apparently trusted the ancient historical dates completely, so he tried to explain this leap within the standard timeline.
But Fomenko had a different idea.
He did. A really unprecedented one, this source says. He decided to check the exactitude of datings of the ancient eclipses that Newton was using for his calculations.
Checking the source data?
Exactly. And he found that another Russian scientist, N.A. Morozov, had already looked into these eclipse dates and argued they were way too old.
Interesting. So what happened when Fomenko used Morozov's dates?
Yeah, the aha moment. He reran the calculations for d double prime using Morozov's revised, more recent dates. and suddenly the graph flattened out. It became a rather even horizontal line that concurred with the conventional gravitational theory perfectly.
So the weird leap just vanished.
It disappeared entirely, which led Fomenko to this big quandary. Could we actually trust the standard timeline of ancient history at all?
Okay, so he takes this mathematical bombshell to the historians at Moscow State University.
And the reaction. The force describes it as polite restraint. Basically, they told him, don't question the established chronology. The dates are in the textbooks.
Leave history to historians.
Pretty much. Occupy themselves with mathematics, that sort of thing.
But he didn't stop there.
Nope. Undeterred. He and his colleagues at Moscow State, starting around 1974, switched gears. They started applying modern statistics and extensive cybernetic computations to analyze historical texts on a massive scale.
Okay, so bringing big data to history, what did that look like?
First step was building this huge thing called the Global Chronological Map, or GCM.
Global Chronological Map. Sounds ambitious.
It was. Described as a priceless encyclopedian and guide to conventional or Scaligerian history. It covered several dozens of square meters, apparently, with tens of thousands of names and dates. Basically, they mapped out the entire history they planned to question.
Wow. Okay, and then they analyzed it.
Yeah, using statistical tools. One key method was calculating proximity coefficients. This let them compare different chronicles to see how statistically similar they were.
Trying to figure out which texts were basically copies of each other versus genuinely independent accounts.
Exactly. They even tested the method on recent history, 17th to 20th century stuff, to make sure it worked. And their first result was finding these interesting statistical tendencies in how texts evolve over time, like what happens when manuscripts get copied and recopied.
So they're seeing patterns in how historical information gets transmitted, maybe distorted?
Right. And that led to what Fomenko calls the really shocking discoveries. Their third principal result was finding tons of these statistically similar chronicles duplicates that everyone previously thought were separate, independent sources, especially for anything dated before the 11th century.
Duplicates, meaning the same basic story appearing multiple times under different historical labels.
That's the idea. And the fourth principal result was even bigger. Their analysis suggested the entire standard chronological map, the GCM, is statistically like a sum or a collage of 4 copies of the same short chronicle, just shifted around in time.
4 copies. So massive repetition, like history repeating itself, literally in the records.
That's the implication. Not just small errors, but whole chunks of history echo duplicated these phantom reflections he talks about. Let's look at one, the Roman Empire. He claims there's a 330-year echo there.
Okay, how does that work?
Well, Fomenko identifies what we call the Second Roman Empire, roughly 82 BC to 217 AD, and the Third Roman Empire, about 270 to 526 AD. His stats suggest they are essentially the same state.
The same state, just 300-odd years apart in the timeline?
Yes, he finds what he calls dynastic parallelism, rulers mirroring each other.
Give me an example.
Like Sulla ruled for 4 years, right? That parallels Aurelian, 5 years. Tiberius ruled 23 years, echoed by Constantius II with 24 years. Nero's 14 years matches Valens's 14 years.
No, those are close.
And while the total lengths were a bit different at first glance, 299 years versus 256, he says they become virtually identical when you properly account for times when emperors ruled jointly, the co-regencies.
Interesting. Are there biographical parallels too?
He argues yes. Figures like Pompey and Diocletian are both seen as organizers of the first triumvirate tetrarchy. And then Octavian Augustus and Constantine I, both described as leaders who gathered all the important functions of military, civil, and religious power in his hands.
Okay, concentrating power.
And then there's the whole Constantinople connection he makes, which is pretty mind-bending. He notes Octavian transformed Rome into a new city, okay, but Constantine famously moves the capital from Rome to New Rome on the Bosphorus, Constantinople.
Right.
Fomenko flips this. He suggests this implies that the Rome we know in Italy today was actually built much later, maybe 13th to 15th century AD, in the image of Constantinople, which he calls Tsargrad. So Constantinople was the original New Rome.
Whoa, so Italian Rome is a later copy of Byzantine Constantinople. That's radical.
It is. He even suggests things like famous statues of Pompey or Augustus might have been made much later, like 16th to 18th century, as sort of visual aids for this new, supposedly incorrect Scaligerian history. not authentic portraits.
Creating props for the narrative, essentially? Wow. Does he apply this duplication idea elsewhere?
Oh yeah, the Papacy. His team ran their dating methods on the list of Roman popes from the 1st century up to 1700 AD. Well, first, he claims the standard list of popes comes from the Book of the Pontifices, a source he says you can't reliably trace back earlier than the 13th century AD.
Okay, so the source itself is relatively late.
And he argues that truly veracious information about popes only really starts around the 3rd century AD. Before that, he considers the pontiffs largely mythical. But the big finding is another duplication. His methods suggest the period from 140 to 314 AD is a statistical duplicate of the period 314 to 532 AD.
Wait, so nearly 2 centuries of papal history repeated.
It covers 43 out of 47 popes in those combined periods. It's as if the same list of reigns got written down twice, centuries apart.
Another phantom reflection. Okay, this is getting wild. What about the biblical connections?
Ah, yes, the biblical echoes in Rome. This involves an even bigger alleged time shift, about 1,230 years.
1,230 years. What's reflecting what here?
He identifies the ancient kingdoms of Israel and Judea, 10th to 7th century BC, with the early medieval Roman Empire of the 4th and 5th centuries AD.
Ancient Israel is medieval Rome. How?
He points to parallels, like Jeroboam I from Israel, a big religious and political leader who moved his capital. Fomenko parallels him with Constantine I of Rome.
Constantine, who also moved his capital.
Right, to Constantinople. And both were tied to new religious movements, Jeroboam's heresy and Arianism.
Okay, I see the pattern he's drawing. What about the end of these lines?
That aligns too, he claims. King Uzziah of Israel getting captured by Shalmaneser, the Assyrian king, is mirrored by Romulus Augustulus, the last Western Roman emperor, being deposed by Odoacer, a German king.
Assyria mirroring Germany, leading to...
Well, this leads Fomenko to some pretty wild speculation about names. He wonders if ancient Assyria might actually be superimposed onto medieval Germany, maybe Prussia, which he connects to White Russia. And he even floats the idea that the name Assyria could be a kind of phonetic flip of Russia, Russia.
Okay, that's quite a linguistic leap. Highly speculative, as you said.
Definitely speculative. But it fits his larger pattern of finding these echoes across vast time scales. And he doesn't stop there. He applies this to core Christian figures, too.
Like Jesus Christ.
Exactly. He proposes an 820-year shift linking Jesus to St. Basil the Great.
St. Basil, conventionally 4th century AD.
Right. Fomenko sees Basil as a phantom reflection of Jesus Christ, but places the actual Jesus much later in the 12th century AD.
12th century, okay. What are the parallels he sees between Basil and Jesus?
He lists quite a few. Both learning a lot when young, both spending time in the wilderness, both returning with 12 close followers.
The 12 disciples parallel, okay.
Both entering Jerusalem, preaching asceticism and poverty. Similar baptism scenes, Jordan River, a dove, a divine voice, or maybe lightning. Transfiguration scenes, too, involving 6 days, bright light, disciples afraid.
These sound like very specific parallels.
They are. He also notes similarities in companions, miracles, temptations by the devil, encounters with sinful women, Mary Magdalene, and a rich widow for Basil, both facing opposition from authorities, going through trials.
But Jesus was crucified. What about Basil?
That's a key point Fomenko makes. The record says Basil was saved from death, a miracle that avoids describing an execution. Fomenko sees this difference as significant, perhaps a later alteration.
Interesting. So one died, one was miraculously saved, but the life stories echo.
That's his argument. And both are seen as founders Jesus of Christianity, Basil of key Christian mysteries, like the liturgy.
Okay, so Basil is one reflection. Are there others?
Yes. He finds another one, this time involving Pope Gregory VII, Hildebrand, from the 11th century AD.
Hildebrand. How does he connect to Jesus?
Fomenko sees Hildebrand as a replica of Jesus Christ, Andronicus, from the 12th century. This involves a different shift, about 100 years relative to his 12th century Jesus, but a 1053-year shift backwards from our current timeline.
A 1053-year shift, okay.
He ties Hildebrand's great ecclesiastical reform of the X century, which definitely radically altered the life of the Europeans, to the reborn Gospels.
And the dates. You mentioned a 1053-year shift.
Yeah, the dates are striking, according to Fomenko. Hildebrand's birth, around 1020 AD, aligns almost perfectly with Jesus' birth, if you calculate it based on Octavian Augustus, shifted by 1073 years.
And their deaths.
Hildebrand died in 1085 AD. Fomenko places Christ's death in 1086 AD, using that same 1053-year shift, just 1 year off.
That is remarkably close.
And this leads Fomenko to maybe his most radical claim about the calendar itself.
Which is?
He asserts that the AD chronological scale only actually begins in the year referred to as 1053 AD nowadays.
Wait, so everything before 1053 AD on our current calendar is phantom artificial?
Essentially, yes. He suggests this phantom year 1053 traveled backwards in time because of another huge chronological shift, maybe deliberate, maybe accidental, of 1053 years imposed sometime in the 16th or 17th century.
Creating a 1,000-year gap or duplication in our timeline. Wow. Okay. Any other Hildebrand parallels?
He mentions Countess Matilda, strong ally of Hildebrand, and notes the phonetic similarity between Matilda and Magdalene. Another odd detail. Apparently no coins depicting Pope Gregory VII have ever been found. Fomenko's explanation: no one ever minted them, because Hildebrand is just a mere reflection of the 12th century figure of Jesus Christ.
That's certainly one explanation for the lack of coins.
He also compares Hildebrand's arrival in Rome in 1049 AD, barefoot, reading prayers in humility, to Jesus' entry into Jerusalem.
The humble entry motif.
And there was a plot to assassinate Hildebrand by someone named Cencius in 1075. Fomenko draws a direct line from this to Judas betraying Jesus, pointing out how negatively both Cencius and Judas are portrayed in their respective stories.
So multiple layers of biographical and chronological echoes, all pointing, for Fomenko, to a much later date for Christ. Does he bring in any other evidence, like astronomical?
He does. He uses astronomy as proof for his 12th century placement. Take the Star of Bethlehem.
Okay.
Fomenko argues it wasn't some first-century event. He thinks it was the famous supernova of 1054 AD, which, due to other dating issues, he claims, actually happened around 1150 AD. That supernova, misdated by a century, was the star.
So redating a known supernova to fit the 12th century, what about the eclipse during the Crucifixion?
Good question. The traditional 33 AD dating involves a lunar eclipse, but Fomenko says it was all but unobservable where it needed to be. He proposes a different lunar eclipse, April 3rd, 1075 AD, conveniently 2 days before Easter that year, as a much better fit.
1075 AD. Okay, so there's solar eclipse possibility?
Yes, he considers that too. He points to a rare combination: a nova exploding around 1150 AD, his redated Star of Bethlehem, and a total solar eclipse visible in the region on May 1st, 1185 AD.
1185 AD. So both astronomical options point to the 11th or 12th century for him.
Exactly. And he adds another layer to the eclipse argument. The Gospels describe the darkness lasting about 3 hours and covering all over the land. Fomenko argues this description implies knowledge of how the moon's shadow moves across the Earth during a solar eclipse. He thinks that level of understanding was impossible in the first century, but plausible for medieval astronomers, say 12th to 14th century.
So the description itself hints at a later origin.
That's his claim, and he tackles the path over eclipse paradox head-on.
Right, solar eclipses can't happen during a full moon, which is when Passover occurs.
Correct. But Fomenko points to medieval art-specific examples, like the Rhemish Missal, La Bible Historiale, that explicitly show a total solar eclipse at the Crucifixion.
Really? Art depicting a solar eclipse?
Yes. He describes them showing the sun is completely covered by the dark lunar disk with the corona visible. The sky is painted black. Starlit sky. He argues this artistic tradition reflects a memory of a solar eclipse event, fitting his 12th century dating, even if it contradicts the Passover timing.
That's fascinating. Using art as evidence for a specific astronomical event. Does this tie into his geography claims?
It does. This all reinforces his claim that the true Jerusalem wasn't in modern Palestine, but was actually Constantinople.
Constantinople as Jerusalem. How does he support that?
He identifies a specific place near Constantinople, Mount Bakos, as Golgotha. He points to a huge grave there, 17 meters by 2 meters, traditionally linked to Joshua, son of Nun, or Ayusha. Fomenko believes this is actually the grave of Jesus, marking the crucifixion spot.
A monumental grave as evidence. What else?
Well, the old name for Constantinople was Tsargrad, and its Golden Gate is apparently now called Isa Kapusu, the Gate of Jesus.
Isa Kapusu, a direct linguistic link.
He finds that significant. And he brings in visual evidence again for medieval paintings supposedly depicting Jerusalem.
What do they show?
They often show Ottoman crescents on top of buildings, and figures like Pontius Pilate wearing turbans with crescents. These are symbols strongly linked to Constantinople's history, not ancient Palestine.
So the iconography points east towards Constantinople.
That's the argument. And even details like tall chimneys over the rooftops in these paintings. Fomenko says this suggests heating was needed, which fits Istanbul's colder climate. It can snow there better than the climate of Jerusalem and Palestine.
Chimneys. That's a subtle detail.
He thinks it's telling. He even finds a literary hint in Bulgakov's Master and Margarita, where a line about 12,000 moons might imply the crucifixion happened around the 10th or 11th century, closer to his timeline.
So echoes in literature, too. This pattern of duplication and redating, does it apply to Roman history beyond the emperors, like early Rome?
Yes, absolutely. He looks at Titus Livy's account of the early Roman kings, another duplication, and another 1053-year shift.
Okay, Livy's regal Rome. How does that parallel work?
Livy's ancient royal Rome, or the First Roman Empire, usually dated c. 753-509 BC, Fomenko identifies statistically with the Third Roman Empire, the one from c. 305-52 AD that we already discussed.
So the earliest Roman kings are reflections of later Roman emperors.
He suggests Livy's 7 kings aren't individuals, but generalized aliases, representing consecutive periods or epochs within that later Third Roman Empire.
And the timelines match up again.
He says the reign durations align virtually ideal. Livy's period covers 244 years. The relevant part of the Third Roman Empire is 242-252 years, another near-perfect statistical match for him.
Okay. Any specific story parallels?
He dives into the Rape of the Sabine story from Livy, attributed to Romulus. He parallels this with a biblical story about the daughters of Shiloh and the tribe of Benjamin losing its women.
What's the connection?
He speculates that daughters of Shiloh might actually have originally meant daughters of Sicily, suggesting a geographical mix-up tied to this chronological confusion.
Sicily instead of Shiloh. Okay. Any other examples from Livy?
He brings up the Vesuvius eruption that destroyed Pompeii, usually dated 79 AD. Fomenko considers this another phantom reflection, possibly reflecting an event during the Honorius era, late 4th, early 5th century AD, or maybe even a much later eruption in the 12th or 16th, 17th century.
Redating Pompeii, too. So why would Livy's history seem to echo these later periods or biblical stories?
Fomenko's conclusion is that Livy's accounts often seem closer to the biblical version of Rome's history than its secular variety. He argues Livy was actually drawing on sources reflecting this later compressed history, not the ancient timeline we assume today.
So Livy himself was working within this different chronological framework, unknowingly perhaps.
Or knowingly, depending on how you interpret Fomenko. The implication is the sources Livy used reflected this shorter, duplicated reality. Okay, so let's try to wrap our heads around this. We've just explored Anatoly Fomenko's really radical idea that the history we learn isn't this straight line, but maybe a fragmented, repeated narrative, pieced together, he claims, in the 16th, 17th centuries from a reality that was much shorter, much more condensed.
It's definitely a deep dive that challenges some fundamental assumptions. It shows how you can apply tools like mathematics, statistics, even astronomy to question the traditional story of history, revealing what Fomenko sees as major inveracities.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see hard science applied to what we usually think of as a humanities field, even if the conclusions are, well, extremely controversial.
Extremely.
And the source makes that point. History is collective memory, yet even our own memory errs at times. Makes you think, doesn't it? If our collective memory, our history, could be this flawed, or maybe even deliberately constructed like Fomenko suggests.
What does that imply about how we understand any historical period, or even how we construct our understanding of the present?
Exactly. How many other historical holy cows, as the source puts it, might not stand up if subjected to this kind of unconventional scrutiny at the altar of reason? It certainly gives you a lot to chew on about what historical truth actually means.